For months, my husband's family knew he was involved with my wealthy, female boss, and they actively helped hide it. When I confronted them during my 40th birthday party, they told me to be mature and accept their relationship. His mother even said, "Don't be selfish, they're entitled to their happiness." I just smiled calmly, agreed, and handed them an envelope. A few minutes later, he was on his knees screaming and begging me to come back, his eyes fixed on what was inside. They were all assembled when I stepped into the conference room. Leo, his parents Margaret and Richard, even his sister Chloe. But this wasn't a meeting for Apex Global Strategies. This was Victoria Sterling's personal office, and my boss was sitting at the head of the table. Looking as if she were part of my husband's family, Margaret was the first to speak. "Isla, we wanted to discuss some restructuring opportunities with you." I stood there, frozen in the doorway, watching my mother-in-law's lips form the words, while my mind struggled to process what I was actually seeing. Leo's hand was resting on Victoria's shoulder, and his wedding band glinted in the light from the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. "Restructuring," I heard myself echo. Richard cleared his throat. "Your role at Apex. Victoria has a few thoughts about your future with the company." It was then that I saw the legal papers spread across the polished table, with Victoria's signature already scrawled on them. The meeting had been set for 3 p.m. I remember because I was in the middle of reviewing quarterly compliance audits when Victoria's assistant called, insisting it was urgent. There were no specifics, just that I had to get to the executive floor right away. The elevator ride up 40 floors had felt completely normal, even routine. I'd made that trip thousands of times in my 5 years at Apex Global, usually with a stack of reports on risk analysis or regulatory breaches that required Victoria's sign-off. But walking into that room demolished everything I thought I knew about my existence. "Have a seat, Isla," Victoria said, her voice laced with that specific tone she used when she had to deliver bad news to a client about a tanking portfolio. She was wearing the sapphire Armani suit I'd complimented her on just last month, the one she'd said made her feel invincible during tough negotiations. I didn't move. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, but they somehow kept me upright. The mahogany table separating us felt as vast as an ocean. Leo hadn't glanced at me once since I'd walked in. His gaze was locked on some imaginary spot just beyond my shoulder, the same way he'd look when he was weighing market risks he didn't want to admit were real. "This is incredibly irregular," I managed to say, my own voice sounding alien. "Any restructuring at Apex should be handled through the proper channels. HR is supposed to be present." Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clutching her designer purse in her lap like a flotation device. She'd been crying recently. I could tell by the thick layer of concealer under her eyes. It was the same brand she'd borrowed from me last Thanksgiving after a nasty fight with her ex-boyfriend. "This isn't a standard corporate restructuring exactly," Richard said, adjusting his tie. The Princeton class ring he never took off flashed in the afternoon sun pouring into Victoria's corner office. "It's more of a family matter that just happens to have professional consequences. A family matter." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. I looked from one face to the next, at these people I had spent a decade of holidays, birthdays, and Sunday dinners with. Margaret wouldn't meet my gaze, staring intently at her phone screen, where I could see the reflection of texts she was trying to answer discreetly. Chloe kept opening and closing her mouth, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't summon the words. And Leo, my husband, the man who had vowed to love and cherish me in front of 200 guests at our wedding, sat there like a complete stranger in a familiar shell. "What kind of family matter requires my boss's presence?" I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer. The late nights Leo had supposedly been working, the sudden business trips that just so happened to align with Victoria's travel itinerary. The way Margaret had started inquiring about my overtime hours and compliance review trips with an uncharacteristic level of interest, Victoria leaned back in her chair, the very same chair where she'd told me 6 months ago that I was being promoted to senior compliance director. that my integrity and meticulous attention to detail made me indispensable to Apex's future, that she considered me more than just an employee, but someone she was grooming for a partnership. "Isla, you're a smart woman," she began, using the same patronizing voice she reserved for explaining complex financial products to new investors. "You must have realized that the dynamics within your marriage have been evolving. Evolving. Such a sterile, clinical word for betrayal. And you've all been privy to this evolution?" I looked directly at Margaret, the woman who'd taught me her family's secret recipe for holiday stuffing, who had held my hand through my father's funeral last year. Margaret finally looked up from her phone. "We didn't want to cause you any unnecessary pain. Some situations resolve themselves if you just give them enough time and space." "Time and space," I repeated. "Is that what you call clandestine meetings in my boss's office?" My eyes were drawn back to the legal documents on the table. From where I was standing, I could make out enough of the text to grasp their intent. Separation agreements, asset division schedules. There was even what looked like a draft of my resignation letter from my position at Apex, already typed on company letterhead. "You've already written my resignation." The laugh that escaped my throat was brittle, sharp enough to cut glass. How considerate. "We wanted to ensure this transition was as smooth as possible," Richard said, deploying his boardroom voice, the one he used when negotiating contracts for the family's import business. "Victoria has been extremely generous with the severance package. Generous. My mentor, the woman I had entrusted with my career, had been plotting my professional execution while apparently sleeping with my husband, and his family had not only been aware, but had actively facilitated it." I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the scene. All of them, gathered around that table with their prepared documents and rehearsed speeches, they looked like a board of directors executing a hostile takeover, which, in a way, they were. "Isla, please be reasonable." Leo finally spoke, his voice careful and measured. "This doesn't need to get adversarial." I looked at him then, really looked at him. The man I'd made coffee for that very morning, exactly the way he liked it. 1 sugar, a splash of cream. He was wearing the silver tie I had bought him for his birthday because it brought out the color of his eyes. "You're right," I said, surprising them all with my composure. "It doesn't have to be adversarial at all." I turned and walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the doorknob. "By the way, Victoria, you might want to reread Apex's Code of Conduct, Section 8B. The part about conflicts of interest involving senior management and their subordinates' immediate family. I drafted that section myself, remember? I'm quite proud of how detailed the reporting requirements are." The color drained from Victoria's face as I pulled the door open. "Oh, and Margaret, cancel whatever you have in mind for my birthday party next month. I'll be making my own arrangements." I left them in that conference room with their documents and their restructuring plans, knowing that the facade of our perfect family had just been shattered beyond any hope of repair. But I also knew something they didn't, that I'd been discreetly documenting irregularities in Victoria's expense reports for weeks, that I'd noticed the pattern of Leo's supposed client dinners lining up perfectly with her travel schedule, and that the senior compliance director at Apex Global Strategies had access to every financial record, every email, and every corporate credit card transaction that would tell the real story of their betrayal. The elevator ride down felt different this time. 40 floors to plot my next move. 40 floors to shift from a victim into the architect of my own brand of justice. The elevator doors opened onto the ground floor of the Apex Tower, and I walked through the cavernous marble lobby on legs that felt completely disconnected from my body. The security guard gave me the same friendly nod he had every evening for the past 5 years, oblivious to the fact that my entire universe had just imploded 40 floors above his head. Outside, Chicago rushed by in its usual blur of taxis and hurried pedestrians, but I just stood on the sidewalk, unable to recall where I'd even parked my car that morning. My phone buzzed. Ben, my assistant, had sent 3 messages while I was trapped in that conference room. Need to talk to you urgently. Off the record, can we meet at the coffee shop on Madison? Ben never asked for off-site meetings. In the 3 years we'd worked together, our conversations had been strictly confined to my office, the compliance department's meeting room, or brief exchanges by the copy machine. I somehow found my car and drove to the coffee shop, my hands surprisingly steady on the wheel even as my mind replayed the image of Leo's fingers on Victoria's shoulder. Ben was already there, hunched over a laptop in a corner booth, his normally impeccable appearance looking a bit disheveled. He looked up as I slid into the seat opposite him, and the look on his face made my chest tighten. "I've been going back and forth on whether to show you this for 2 weeks," he said without any preamble, turning his laptop screen towards me. "But after I saw you come down from Victoria's office looking like that, I can't stay silent anymore." The screen displayed Victoria's executive calendar, which Ben had access to for scheduling. He had highlighted dozens of blocked-out periods over the last 3 months. Private portfolio review was the entry over and over again, always during times I was away on business for audits or compliance training. "There's never a client name attached," Ben said softly. "No dial-in info, no meeting room booked, and look at the pattern." He scrolled through the weeks, and I saw it with sickening clarity. Every single one of those private portfolio reviews aligned perfectly with my out-of-office schedule. "How long has this been going on?" My voice sounded unnervingly normal. "The first one I noticed was in September, the weekend you went to Denver for that regulatory conference." Ben switched to another screen, this one showing corporate credit card statements Victoria had expensed a dinner for 2 at Alinea that Saturday. The entry was listed as client development, but with no client name recorded September, 3 months ago. The same time Leo had started locking his laptop, taking calls in his study with the door shut, and showering before breakfast instead of after. "There's more," Ben said, his voice gentle but resolute. "Your husband's investment firm started getting referrals from Apex around the same time, high-value clients that would normally go to one of our established partners." I stared at the screen, watching the evidence of my life's collapse laid out in calendar entries and expense reports. "Why are you showing me this, Ben? You're taking a massive risk." He closed the laptop and met my eyes directly. "Because you're the only executive at Apex who has ever treated me like a person instead of a piece of office furniture, and because what they're doing isn't just wrong, it's illegal. Steering clients to benefit a personal relationship? That's a violation of about a dozen different regulations you taught me to look out for." Before I could answer, my phone rang. Margaret's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, but she immediately called back. Then a third time. "I should probably take this," I said, though the last thing on earth I wanted was to hear my mother-in-law's voice. "Isla, darling," Margaret said when I answered, her tone artificially bright. "I've been trying to get a hold of you. Are you coming for dinner on Sunday? I need to give a head count to the caterer." "Caterer? Since when do you cater Sunday dinner?" "Oh, didn't Leo mention? We're having a few extra people over. Some potential business partners Richard is trying to impress." She paused. "You're not traveling this weekend, are you? I know you have that Atlanta conference coming up." The Atlanta conference wasn't for another 2 weeks, and I hadn't told anyone about it except for my immediate team. "How did you know about Atlanta, Margaret?" "Oh, I must have heard Leo mention it. You know how proud he is of your career. Speaking of which, are you working late tomorrow? I was thinking of popping into the city, thought we could grab lunch if you're available." 3 calls in a single week asking about my schedule. My mother-in-law, who usually communicated through Leo or the occasional holiday card, was suddenly obsessed with my every move. "I'll let you know about Sunday," I said and hung up. Ben was watching me, his expression full of concern. "You okay?" My mother-in-law has called me 3 times this week to ask about my schedule. She's never done that in 10 years. I looked at the calendar entries on his laptop again. "Ben, can you check if there were any Vance family names on Victoria's calendar during those blocked-out times?" His fingers flew across the keyboard. "I can't see the meeting details, but..." He pulled up the visitor log from building security. "This is interesting. Leo Vance signed in as a guest of Victoria Sterling 4 times in the last month. Always on days you were traveling. 4 times. 4 times my husband had visited my boss while I was out of town, and not a single person had thought to mention it. Not Leo, not Victoria, not even Chloe, who worked just 2 floors down and must have seen him in the building. The company's annual charity gala was 2 weeks later. It was Apex's big fundraiser for children's literacy, the one event where attendance was basically mandatory for all senior staff. Except that year, I was stuck in Denver, dealing with an emergency audit that had mysteriously become critical just 3 days before the event. "You have to go, Isla," Victoria had insisted when the audit issue came up. "You're the only one I trust to handle the Fitzgerald account properly. I'll make your apologies at the gala." I'd spent that entire weekend cooped up in a sterile Denver hotel room, poring over documents that could have easily waited another week, missing the gala, where apparently my husband had stepped in to be my boss's date. The photos on the company's Instagram feed told the story I was never meant to see. Leo in his tuxedo, standing beside Victoria in a breathtaking gold gown, his hand resting on the small of her back as they posed for a picture with clients. The caption read, "Apex Global Strategies is grateful for the support of our extended family." Extended family. The phrase made my stomach turn now. My colleague Bethany had mentioned it casually the following Monday. "Your husband is so charming. He had everyone at Victoria's table roaring with laughter. He's such a natural networker." Victoria's table. Not at the general reception, not mingling with different groups, but seated at her personal table for the entire evening, an honor usually reserved for major clients or board members, not the spouses of employees. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place 3 weeks before my 40th birthday, at the wedding of Richard's niece. She was a sweet girl who had just finished her residency at Northwestern. The reception was at the top of the Hancock Tower, all glittering Chicago skyline and champagne fountains. I was standing on the observation deck, trying to get a moment of peace, when Daniel found me. Leo's younger brother had always been the weak link in the Vance family's emotional armor, too sensitive for their cold, strategic approach to relationships. He was swaying slightly, clutching a champagne flute like a lifeline. "Isla," he slurred, his voice thick with alcohol and something else. "You're too good for all this, for what they're doing." "What who is doing, Daniel?" He glanced around nervously, then leaned in closer. "The family, they've been handling things, managing the situation. But you deserve to know that. Daniel." Chloe appeared as if out of nowhere, her smile as sharp and thin as a shard of glass. "Mom's looking for you. Something about the toast." She grabbed his arm, but Daniel pulled away. "She should know, Chloe. It's been months. The whole family knows, and we're all just pretending." "Daniel is just overwhelmed," Chloe said to me, her fingers digging into her brother's arm. "Wedding emotions and too much champagne. You know how he gets." She dragged him away before he could say more, but his words echoed in my mind. The whole family knows. Daniel's drunken confession haunted me as I drove home from the wedding. The Chicago skyline a blurry mess through tears I refused to let fall. In my rearview mirror, I could still see the lights of the Hancock Tower, where inside, my husband's family was still celebrating, having successfully silenced another near confession from their weakest link. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat at our kitchen table staring at my laptop, Daniel's words swirling together with Ben's calendar evidence and Margaret's suspicious phone calls. The pattern was undeniable, begging to be acknowledged. But I needed more. I needed proof that would stand up not just in my own broken heart, but in any courtroom or boardroom where this might eventually end. My college roommate, Beth, had gone through her own corporate nightmare 2 years prior, when her business partner embezzled funds while having an affair with her husband. She'd mentioned a forensic accountant who had saved her from total financial ruin. I scrolled back through my texts and found the contact info. Dr. Evelyn Reed, Discreet Financial Investigations. Evelyn answered on the second ring, even though it was well past midnight. Beth told me you might be calling, she said simply. Can you meet tomorrow? Bring every financial document you have access to: tax returns, bank statements, investment portfolios, corporate filings, everything. We met at her office in Bridgeport, a nondescript brick building that could have been a dental practice or an insurance agency. Evelyn was not what I'd expected. She was in her mid-50s, wearing jeans and a University of Chicago sweatshirt, looking more like a favorite aunt than a financial detective who'd taken down multi-million-dollar fraud schemes. "Tell me what you know," she said, pushing a cup of coffee across the desk toward me. I laid it all out for her. The calendar patterns, the family's bizarre behavior, Leo's sudden interest in Apex events, Daniel's drunken confession. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally asking for a specific date or name, but mostly just letting me talk. "And you have access to Apex's financial systems?" she asked when I was done. "I'm the Senior Compliance Director. I have access to everything except for executive compensation details." Evelyn smiled for the first time. "That's more than enough. Here's what we're going to look for: unusual patterns in client referrals, contracts that didn't follow standard approval protocols, investment opportunities that should have gone through a competitive bidding process but didn't." She was right. Over the next 3 days, working after hours when the Apex offices were nearly empty, I pulled records that painted a devastating picture 6 months ago. Right around the time those mysterious calendar blocks started appearing, Victoria had begun steering prime investment opportunities to smaller boutique firms instead of our usual institutional partners. The firm that was receiving the lion's share of these opportunities? Vance Capital, the family business Leo had joined 2 years ago. The numbers were staggering. Premium municipal bonds that should have been offered to our top-tier clients, private equity deals with guaranteed returns, pre-IPO stock allocations that major investment firms would kill for. All of it was quietly funneled to the Vance's struggling import business, which had mysteriously rebranded as an investment management firm just as Victoria and Leo grew closer. $1.8 million in directed business over 6 months, Evelyn said when I showed her the documents. "That's not an affair. That's a financial conspiracy. Your husband's family didn't just know about the relationship, they were profiting from it." The evidence only became more damning as we dug deeper. Leo's signature on contracts he had no authority to see. Margaret listed as a consultant on deals, despite having 0 financial credentials. Chloe's interior design firm suddenly winning all of Apex's marketing and event contracts at rates 30% above market value. I stayed up until 2 a.m. that night in my home office, mapping it all out on the whiteboard I normally used for compliance workflows. Red lines connected dates, blue circles marked financial transactions. Green highlights showed every family dinner where my travel schedule had been a topic of discussion. The web that emerged looked less like a sordid affair and more like a coordinated corporate raid. Sunday dinner, 3 weeks before my discovery, Margaret asking about my Denver trip. Monday, Victoria scheduling a private portfolio review for those exact dates. Tuesday, $1 million bond allocation to Vance Capital Wednesday. Leo bringing home flowers. The guilty gesture I had mistaken for work stress. The corporate credit card discovery was an accident. I was reviewing routine expense reports for the quarterly filing, the kind of mindless work I did while listening to podcasts. When Leo's name popped up on an authorized user list, not for his own firm's cards, but for Apex Global Strategies corporate card ending in 7719, Victoria's executive account. My hands trembled as I pulled up the detailed statements. The Peninsula Hotel, multiple charges on the exact dates I had been in Atlanta for compliance training. Alinea, per se, 11 Madison Park, intimate dinners for 2 during my Denver audit, a Hamptons rental labeled as a client entertainment weekend that coincided with my mother's birthday visit to California. But the worst was a charge at Tiffany Co. the day after my promotion was announced. A $15,000 charge for what the receipt described as a diamond line bracelet. The same day, Leo had told me how proud he was, held me close, and promised we'd celebrate properly as soon as things calmed down at his firm. I was printing these documents when Chloe appeared in the doorway of my office. It was 7 p.m., and the Apex building was mostly empty except for a few junior analysts on a deadline. She looked haggard, her designer suit wrinkled, her usually perfect makeup smudged. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. I kept printing, the rhythmic whir of the machine filling the silence between us. Chloe sank into my guest chair, clutching her purse like a shield. "I know you know," she said finally. "Daniel told me what he said at the wedding." "What exactly do I know, Chloe?" I turned to face her, keeping my expression neutral despite the inferno of rage building in my chest. She opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at the ceiling as if searching for a script. "The family. We've been trying to protect you from unnecessary pain. Sometimes these things work themselves out if you give them space and time." "Space and time," I repeated. "Is that what you call facilitating secret meetings between my husband and my boss?" Chloe's face crumpled. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. At first, it was just business. Victoria could help our family's firm, and Leo was the natural point of contact. But then," she twisted the strap of her purse, "Mom and Dad saw an opportunity. They said if Leo was happy and the business was thriving, everyone would eventually benefit. Everyone, except for me. They said you were too focused on your career to notice that you and Leo had grown apart, that this was just an evolution." The word made me physically ill. Evolution, as if betrayal were a natural, inevitable process, like erosion or continental drift. Chloe stood up abruptly. "I shouldn't have come. I just wanted you to know that not all of us agreed with it. Daniel and we tried to tell them it was wrong, but the money, Isla, the family business was failing. Dad was going to lose everything." She left before I could respond, her confession hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that had been burning for months, while I slept peacefully in the same house, ate at the same table, and loved the same people who were orchestrating my ruin. I stood in my empty office, Chloe's words still echoing around me. The family business was failing. They had traded my marriage for their financial survival. The printer continued its steady rhythm, spitting out page after page of evidence that would either destroy them or destroy me. There was no middle ground left. That night, I went home and cooked dinner, as if nothing had changed. Leo sat across from me at our dining table, cutting his steak with the same precise movements he applied to everything, unaware that I had started recording our conversations on my phone, which was tucked beneath my napkin. "How was your day?" he asked, the question as hollow as our marriage had become. "Busy. The quarterly compliance reports are due soon." I watched him nod absently, scrolling through his phone. "Margaret called again today. She seems very interested in my schedule lately." His fingers paused for just a moment on the screen. "She's probably planning something for your birthday. You know how she gets about family celebrations?" Family celebrations. I wanted to laugh at the bitter irony, but instead I said, "She asked specifically about the Atlanta conference. I haven't even told her about it yet." "Maybe I mentioned it," he said, still not looking up. "Can you pass the salt?" For the next 3 weeks, I transformed into someone I didn't recognize. Every evening after Leo went to sleep, I worked in the darkness of our guest room, photographing documents with my phone's flashlight, uploading files to encrypted drives that I had Kara, my friend from college, store in her apartment in Bridgeport. She didn't ask any questions when I showed up at her door at midnight with USB drives wrapped in plastic bags. She just made me tea and promised to keep them safe. The family dinners became intelligence-gathering missions. I would arrive early to help Margaret in the kitchen, my phone recording from my jacket pocket as she chattered on about Leo's promising new clients and how Victoria had been so wonderfully generous with referrals. "Such a brilliant woman," Margaret said one Sunday, arranging roses in a Waterford vase. "She really understands the value of strategic partnerships, Not everyone has that kind of vision. Strategic partnerships, I repeated, slicing tomatoes with more force than necessary. Is that what we're calling it now? Margaret's hand stilled on the flowers. I'm not sure I know what you mean, dear. Nothing, I said with a tight smile. Just thinking about work. Richard was less subtle. During dinner, he'd lean back in his chair, bourbon in hand, and pontificate about the changing landscape of investment management. Relationships are everything in this business, he'd say, looking directly at Leo. Sometimes you have to make unconventional alliances to survive. I recorded all of it. Every knowing glance, every coded reference, every moment they thought they were being clever while I played the part of the oblivious wife, too absorbed in her career to notice the conspiracy unfolding in her own life. The breakthrough came during a routine system update at Apex. As Senior Compliance Director, I had to review all expense categorizations for the quarter, a mind-numbing task that involved cross-referencing thousands of transactions. But buried deep within the client development budget, I found Victoria's fatal flaw, her hubris. She had been billing everything to the company. The Valentino dress she wore to the charity gala was labeled Client Relationship Building. A couples massage at the Mandarin Oriental was expensed as Executive Stress Management. A private jet to Martha's Vineyard was a strategic planning retreat. And each receipt, each transaction, bore two signatures, Victoria Sterling and Leo Vance. My husband had been signing off on luxury purchases for another woman, authorizing expenses that violated every single policy I had personally written for Apex. The paper trail was so brazen, so carelessly arrogant, it took my breath away. They hadn't just been having an affair, they had been meticulously documenting it in corporate financial records. I photographed everything, backed it up in 3 different locations, and sent encrypted copies to Dr. Evelyn Reed. Her response was immediate. This is wire fraud, securities fraud, embezzlement. Your boss just handed you a federal case. The baby shower for Richard's niece, Sophia, provided the final piece I needed. It was held at the University Club of Chicago, all pastel balloons and champagne brunches, the kind of event where the Vance women performed their social duties with practiced grace. I arrived late, claiming work delays, my phone already recording in my purse. Margaret pulled me aside near the gift table, her Chanel perfume overwhelming in the small space. You look tired, dear. All this work can't be good for you. It's just a demanding time, I said, letting a hint of exhaustion creep into my voice. Sometimes I wonder if I'm missing out on other things by focusing so much on my career. Margaret's eyes lit up with the satisfaction of someone who had been waiting for this exact opening. A career is important, but it shouldn't be everything. Sometimes we need to accept that people grow in different directions. Leo, for instance, has been exploring new horizons lately. It's healthy for a marriage when both partners have room to explore their options. Explore their options? I kept my voice carefully neutral. Oh, you know what I mean. Professional development, new connections. Victoria has been wonderful for his career growth. You should be proud that he's expanding his network. And you think I should just focus on my career while Leo explores? Exactly. Margaret squeezed my arm, mistaking my tone for acceptance. You're such a smart girl, Isla. Focus on what you do best and let Leo do the same. Everyone ends up happier that way. Her words, captured clearly on my phone, were the confession I needed. Not just knowledge of the affair, but active encouragement, strategic planning, family collusion in my humiliation. That night, I locked myself in our bedroom while Leo attended another late client meeting. That we both knew had nothing to do with clients, I spread everything out across the bed. Printed emails, photographed receipts, transcribed recordings, Evelyn's financial analysis, Ben's calendar evidence. It looked like the war room of a prosecutor preparing for the trial of the century. I worked until dawn, organizing everything into a single comprehensive report. Each section was meticulously documented with dates, times, and irrefutable evidence. The financial fraud alone totaled over $300,000 in misappropriated corporate funds. The conflicts of interest violated dozens of SEC regulations. The paper trail led directly from Victoria's executive suite to the Vance family's bank accounts. But the most damning section was the timeline. 6 months of deception laid out hour by hour, dinner by dinner, lie by lie. Every time Leo had kissed me goodbye while planning to meet Victoria. Every family gathering where they had discussed my schedule to facilitate their encounters. Every moment they had smiled at me while counting the money flowing from my boss to their accounts. As the sun began to rise over Chicago, I looked at the man sleeping in our bed, his face peaceful in the morning light. He had no idea that I had just built a case that would destroy everything he had ever known. The woman he had married, the one who trusted blindly and loved completely, was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that love without respect was worthless, and that the best revenge wasn't emotional, it was procedural, systematic, and absolutely devastating. I closed my laptop and stared at the comprehensive report I had assembled, my husband still sleeping peacefully beside me as the morning sun painted our bedroom walls gold. The evidence was complete, undeniable, and devastating. Now I just needed to decide how to deploy it. The answer came 3 days later in the form of a phone call from Margaret. "Isla, darling, your birthday is just next month," she said, her voice carrying an unusual brightness that immediately put me on alert. "Richard and I want to host a party for you at our townhouse. It's such a milestone birthday. 40 deserves a proper celebration." Margaret had never once offered to host my birthday in the 10 years we'd been married. My birthdays were usually quiet dinners with Leo, maybe a weekend trip if our schedules permitted. This sudden enthusiasm felt orchestrated, just like everything else the Vance family had been planning behind my back. "That's very generous, Margaret, but I insist," she interrupted, her tone shifting from suggestion to command. "I've already started making arrangements. Saturday the 15th, cocktails at 7, dinner at 8. I thought we'd keep it intimate. Family and close friends." "Who did you have in mind for the guest list?" There was a beat of silence, the kind that precedes carefully rehearsed words. "Well, family, of course, some of Richard's business associates, and I thought it would be appropriate to invite Victoria Sterling, given your professional relationship. It would be a nice gesture, don't you think? To show there are no hard feelings between work and family life." No hard feelings. The phrase hung between us like a confession she didn't even realize she'd made. I gripped my phone tighter, forcing my voice to remain steady. Of course, Victoria should definitely be there. "Wonderful. I'll handle everything. You just show up and look beautiful." After hanging up, I sat at my desk and mapped out exactly what Margaret was planning, a controlled environment where they could manage the narrative. They were probably going to announce Leo and Victoria's relationship as if it were a mutual decision we had all reached together. They would frame it as sophisticated, modern, evolved, all the words they had been practicing in their family conferences while plotting my downfall. The timing was perfect, but not for the reason they thought. I spent the next week making my own preparations. First, I visited the offices of the Securities and Exchange Commission in downtown Chicago. The building's austere lobby and strict security felt fitting for what I was about to do. The investigator who took my report, a woman named Janet Chin with kind eyes and an uncompromising demeanor, reviewed my documentation with growing interest. "This is extensive," she said, flipping through the evidence of financial fraud. "How long have you been compiling this?" 3 weeks of active documentation. But the crimes have been going on for 6 months. She looked up sharply at my use of the word crimes. "You understand that once you file a formal complaint, it triggers an investigation that cannot be stopped." "I understand completely. 2 days before the party, I hand-delivered copies of the complete file to 3 different destinations. The SEC received the full financial fraud documentation. Apex's board of directors received a package via certified mail detailing their CEO's misuse of corporate resources and breach of fiduciary duty. The state attorney general's office received evidence of the broader conspiracy involving contract manipulation and commercial bribery. Each package was timed to arrive on Monday morning. 48 hours after my birthday party, I wanted the Vances to enjoy one last weekend of thinking they had won before their world imploded with the force of a federal investigation. The envelope I prepared for the party itself was a masterpiece of condensed destruction. Into a single manila envelope, I placed only the most damning pieces of evidence: photographs of Leo's signatures on Victoria's personal expenses, screenshots of text messages between him and Victoria discussing the family's financial benefits from their relationship, Margaret's recorded admission that she wanted me to focus on my career while Leo explored his options, and copies of the filed SEC and AG reports with their official timestamps clearly visible. I sealed it with the same methodical care I used when preparing compliance reports that would end careers and trigger criminal investigations. This envelope would be my birthday gift to myself, the moment I stopped being their victim and became the architect of their downfall. Kara agreed to attend the party without hesitation when I explained what I needed. We met at a coffee shop in Bridgeport where she lived, far from any chance encounters with the Vance social circle. "You want me to record whatever happens?" she asked, stirring sugar into her latte. "They're planning something. I can feel it. They want to use my birthday party to force me into accepting the situation publicly, probably with all their high society friends as witnesses." Kara's expression hardened. She had been there for my wedding, had seen me build my life with Leo, and had watched me try to balance my career with being the perfect Vance daughter-in-law. Where should I position myself? Margaret always makes speeches from the fireplace in their living room. If you can get a clear angle from near the bar, you'll capture everything. Use your phone, but be discreet. I want documentation of whatever they have planned, and I want multiple angles of their reactions when I give them my response. You're going to confront them? I'm going to give them exactly what they think they want, a mature, sophisticated response to their betrayal. They just won't realize until it's too late that my definition of maturity includes full accountability. The Thursday before the party, I visited my lawyer to ensure all my personal finances were secure. I opened new bank accounts in my name only, moved my retirement funds, and documented the current value of all our marital assets. If Leo wanted a divorce after what was coming, I would be ready. That evening, I found Leo in his study, the door uncharacteristically open. He looked up when I entered, a flicker of something crossing his face. Guilt, perhaps, or just anticipation of the elaborate charade his family had planned for Saturday. "Your mother called about the party," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "It's very thoughtful of her to host." "She wants to do something special for you," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "You only turn 40 once." "True, and she mentioned Victoria will be there." Leo's fingers stilled on his keyboard. "Is that a problem?" Why would it be a problem? She's my boss. We work together every day. He studied my face, searching for something. Suspicion, anger, knowledge. But I had learned to wear the same mask they had all been wearing for months, the one that said everything was fine while kingdoms burned behind our eyes. "You're right," he said finally. "It's good to maintain those relationships." Relationships. Everything in the Vance world came down to relationships, connections, networks. They had built their entire conspiracy on the assumption that relationships mattered more than truth, that connections trumped integrity, that networks could survive any revelation if they were properly managed. Saturday would teach them otherwise. Saturday would show them that some betrayals can't be managed, negotiated, or restructured. Some betrayals demand the kind of justice that comes with federal investigations and public disgrace. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp March air that made Chicago look like a movie set. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the black cocktail dress I'd chosen specifically for this evening, elegant enough for Margaret's standards, but dark enough for a funeral, which, in a way, this was. The funeral for illusions, for family bonds, for the life we had all been pretending to live. Leo emerged from the bathroom, his cologne filling the room with the same scent he'd worn to our wedding. "You look beautiful," he said, meeting my eyes in the mirror. For a fleeting moment, something flickered across his face, regret perhaps, or maybe just excitement for the performance his family had orchestrated. "Thank you," I replied, slipping the manila envelope into my purse. "Your mother will appreciate that we're making an effort." The drive to the townhouse felt longer than usual. Leo kept checking his phone at red lights, his thumb swiping across the screen in quick, nervous gestures. I watched the city lights pass by, counting the minutes until everything would change. Margaret had outdone herself with the decorations. The townhouse glowed with soft lighting, fresh flowers adorned every surface, and enough champagne was flowing to float a small boat. Guests were already arriving when we walked in. Richard's business associates, Margaret's book club friends, and a handful of my colleagues from Apex who looked slightly out of place in the opulent setting. "Ela, darling." Margaret swept toward me in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and air kisses. "Happy birthday! You look absolutely stunning." Over her shoulder, I saw Victoria near the bar, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She raised her champagne glass to me in a mock toast, her smile as sharp as the winter wind. Kara had already positioned herself exactly where we had discussed, phone discreetly ready, her expression neutral as she chatted with one of Richard's golf buddies about market volatility. The party unfolded like a carefully choreographed play. Appetizers were passed, champagne was poured, and conversations revolved around safe topics. Real estate prices, vacation plans, the usual Chicago social currency. But I could feel the undercurrent of anticipation, the way Margaret kept checking her watch, how Richard and Chloe exchanged meaningful glances across the room. At exactly 8:30, Margaret clinked her glass with a silver spoon, calling for attention. "Everyone, please, a toast to our dear Isla on her 40th birthday." The crowd gathered, glasses raised as Margaret delivered a speech that would have sounded heartfelt to anyone who didn't know better. She spoke about family, about growth, about embracing change and new chapters. Every word was loaded with a double meaning, a hidden message wrapped in birthday wishes. "To Isla," she concluded, "may this year bring you clarity, acceptance, and the wisdom to recognize happiness in all its forms." The guests applauded and drank. That's when Margaret touched my elbow gently. "Isla, dear, could you join us in the library for a moment? Richard has a special gift he'd like to present privately." I followed her down the hallway, hearing Leo's footsteps behind me. The library door was already open, with Richard and Chloe waiting inside like judges in a courtroom. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a trap, springing shut. "This is difficult," Richard began, "but we believe you're mature enough to handle the truth Leo and Victoria have developed feelings for each other, real, profound feelings that transcend conventional relationships." "Transcend," I repeated, tasting the word like spoiled wine. "They're soulmates," Margaret continued, warming to her theme. "You can't fight that kind of connection. It would be selfish to try." Richard nodded sagely. "You're an intelligent woman, Ela. Surely you understand that forcing people to deny their true feelings only creates misery for everyone involved." Chloe finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "You're strong enough to handle this with dignity. We all know how capable you are." I let them finish their entire presentation, their carefully rehearsed arguments about emotional evolution and mature acceptance. They spoke about Leo's happiness as if it were a commodity more valuable than my own dignity. They framed Victoria's pursuit of my husband as some cosmic inevitability rather than calculated predation. When they finally fell silent, waiting for my response, I smiled. It was the same smile I used when reviewing contracts that contained hidden termination clauses. "You're absolutely right," I said calmly. "I should handle this with maturity and grace." Margaret's face lit up with relief. Richard actually sighed. Chloe's shoulders slumped as tension left her body. They thought they had won. They thought their careful manipulation had worked. "Shall we return to the party?" Margaret suggested, already moving toward the door. "No need to let this spoil your birthday celebration." I followed them back into the main room, where guests continued their conversations. Oblivious to the family tribunal that had just convened, Leo stood near the fireplace with Victoria, their bodies angled toward each other with the unconscious intimacy of lovers who think they're being discreet. I walked directly toward them, my heels clicking on the marble floor with metronomic precision. The envelope in my purse felt warm against my side. Conversations around us began to quiet as people sensed a shift in the room's atmosphere. "Leo, Victoria," I said, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "Since we're all being mature adults here, I have something for you both." I pulled out the envelope, holding it between us like a verdict. Leo's face went pale before he even opened it. Perhaps he recognized the weight of it, the way truly devastating documents always feel heavier than they should. "Isla, what is this?" Victoria's voice carried a warning, but it was too late. "Open it," I said simply. "After all, we're handling this like sophisticated people, aren't we?" Leo's fingers fumbled with the seal. I watched as his eyes scanned the first page, the SEC filing stamp clearly visible at the top, the case number already assigned. His hands began to shake as he reached the second page. The documented fraud, the signatures he had placed on Victoria's personal expenses. The sound that escaped him wasn't quite a scream. It was more primal than that. The sound of someone watching everything they'd built evaporate like morning mist. The envelope fell from his hands, its pages scattering across the marble floor where guests could see the official letterheads, the word fraud visible in bold letters, and the Vance family business name listed as a co-conspirator in financial crimes. "Isla, please!" "You don't understand." His voice cracked, and he reached for me with the same hands that had signed away our marriage for money he'd never legally earned. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice carrying across the now silent room. "My husband's family has known about his affair with my boss for months. They facilitated it because Victoria was steering illegal profits to their struggling business, and every person in that library just tried to convince me to accept it all quietly." The room remained frozen, the documents lying scattered across Margaret's imported Italian marble floor. Guests stood like statues, their champagne flutes suspended midway to their lips, watching the Vance family's carefully constructed world shatter in real-time. Kara, from her position by the bar, had captured everything on her phone. The confrontation, the scattered papers, and now the stunned silence that followed my announcement. Margaret was the first to move, her face cycling through a slideshow of emotions: confusion, rage, fear, and finally, a desperate calculation as she tried to find words that might salvage the situation. "This is obviously a misunderstanding," she said, her voice pitched too high, addressing the room rather than me. "Family matters can be so complicated. Federal fraud investigations aren't family matters," I said, bending to pick up one of the pages. "This is a copy of the complaint filed with the SEC. On Monday morning, investigators will begin reviewing how Victoria Sterling used Apex Global's resources to enrich the Vance family business through illegal contracts and kickbacks." Victoria stood perfectly still, her red dress now looking like a warning flag. Her eyes met mine across the room, and I saw the exact moment she understood the full scope of what I had done. Her phone buzzed once, twice, 3 times. probably her lawyer, already alerting her to the freeze orders that would hit her personal and corporate accounts within hours. The guests began to leave, murmuring excuses about early mornings and forgotten commitments. No one wanted to be associated with a scandal of this magnitude. Richard's golf buddies avoided eye contact as they shuffled past. Margaret's book club friends whispered among themselves, already composing the gossip they would spread through the Gold Coast by Sunday brunch. By Monday afternoon, the dominoes were falling with breathtaking speed. I sat in my home office watching the destruction unfold through a stream of emails, news alerts, and phone calls. I didn't answer. Apex's board had convened an emergency meeting at 7 a.m. By noon, Victoria was suspended pending investigation, her company access revoked, her office sealed. The FBI had arrived at 10 a.m. with boxes to collect hard drives, beginning the forensic accounting that would unravel years of carefully hidden fraud. Ben sent me a single text. "She's gone. Feds are here. Board wants to see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. The Vance family business hemorrhaged clients like a severed artery. 3 major contracts were terminated within 24 hours as partners scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Richard's phone rang constantly. I could hear it from the street when I drove past their townhouse, but nobody was calling with good news. Tuesday evening, Leo came home to pack. I heard his key in the lock and stayed in the kitchen, giving him the space to gather his things. But he found me anyway, standing in our bedroom doorway with red-rimmed eyes and 3 days of stubble. "Can we talk?" His voice was hoarse, broken. I turned from the window where I'd been watching the city lights. "There's nothing to discuss, Leo. Your lawyer can contact mine." He stepped into the room, and suddenly the space felt suffocatingly small. "Isla, please. Just let me explain." "Explain what? How you signed off on Victoria's personal expenses. How your family orchestrated this whole thing. How you all sat around planning my humiliation while eating dinners that I cooked for you." He dropped to his knees beside our bed, the bed where we had spent 10 years together, where we had talked about the children we would never have, where I had held him after his grandmother's funeral. "I never meant for it to go this far," he sobbed, his body shaking. "It started as business. Dad's company was failing. Victoria offered to help, and then it became something else. It became fraud. It became conspiracy. It became betrayal on a scale I couldn't have imagined. My family pushed me toward her. They said it was for everyone's benefit, that you were too focused on your career to notice or care. They made it seem like I was doing the right thing for everyone. His words might have moved me 6 months ago, back when I still believed in the man I had married. Now they sounded like exactly what they were. Desperate attempts to shift blame, to minimize accountability, to transform himself from a perpetrator into a victim. "Your family didn't forge your signature on those documents," I said quietly. "They didn't force you to meet Victoria at the peninsula while I was traveling for work. You made those choices, Leo." "I still love you," he whispered, reaching for my hand. I stepped back. "No, you don't. You love the life I provided. The stability, the respectability, the cover for your family's schemes. But love doesn't conspire. Love doesn't deceive. Love doesn't treat someone's dignity as acceptable collateral damage." Wednesday brought the divorce papers. My lawyer, recommended by Dr. Reed, was a specialist in high-asset divorces involving financial crimes. She presented Leo with terms that were non-negotiable. He would forfeit any claim to the brownstone, our joint investments, and even the car. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue additional criminal charges for the fraudulent tax returns we had filed jointly while he was hiding illegal income. His attorney, looking exhausted from 3 days of damage control, advised him to sign. "The criminal prosecution is going to be bad enough," I heard him say in the hallway. "Don't add a vindictive divorce trial to your problems." Leo signed with hands that shook so badly he could barely hold the pen. The man who had once confidently signed million-dollar investment deals was reduced to a trembling mess, watching 10 years of his life dissolve in black ink. Thursday afternoon, Chloe appeared at my door. She looked destroyed. Her designer clothes wrinkled, her makeup streaked down her cheeks, her usual composure completely shattered. I almost didn't let her in, but something in her expression made me open the door wider. "I need to tell you everything," she said, collapsing onto my couch. "Not for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. But you should know the whole truth." She talked for an hour while my security system recorded every word. How the conspiracy had started 8 months ago when Richard confessed the family business was on the brink of collapse. How Margaret had suggested Leo leverage his relationship with me to get closer to Victoria. How they had coached him through the initial approach, telling him it was just networking, just business development. "We all knew from the beginning," Chloe sobbed. "Every Sunday dinner, we'd discuss your schedule, plan their meetings, and strategize about how to keep you from finding out. Mom would say you were too smart to be fooled forever, but by then the money would be secured, and you'd have to accept it." "You thought I was naive," I said. "We thought you were too focused on being perfect, the perfect wife, the perfect employee, to see what was happening right in front of you. We didn't count on you being systematic thorough. We didn't know you were documenting everything." She left as the sun set, her confession recorded and saved in 3 different locations. The evidence was now complete. Not just financial fraud, but conspiracy, premeditation, and systematic deception involving every single member of the Vance family. By Friday, Margaret's calls had shifted from angry demands for an explanation to desperate pleas for mercy. She left voicemails that cycled through the entire spectrum of manipulation: guilt, rage, bargaining, and appeals to family loyalty. "You're destroying she wept in one message. "Richard is having chest pains. The business is ruined. How can you do this to your family?" Family. The word had lost all meaning. Family was supposed to protect you, not orchestrate your betrayal. Family was supposed to celebrate your successes, not use them as opportunities for exploitation. Family was supposed to love you, not trade your dignity for financial gain. I deleted every message without listening to the end. The Vances had made their choices months ago when they decided my marriage was an acceptable sacrifice for their financial survival. I sat in my empty brownstone that Friday night, Margaret's desperate voicemails finally deleted, the silence feeling like the first clean breath after swimming up from deep water. The house felt different now, not lonely but spacious, not abandoned but liberated. I poured myself a glass of wine, not one of the expensive bottles Leo had collected to impress his colleagues, but a simple Malbec I actually enjoyed, and I started planning what came next. 6 months passed in a blur of legal proceedings, depositions, and rebuilding. The investigation into Apex Global expanded beyond Victoria to implicate the entire executive team. The board, desperate to salvage the company's reputation, offered me a generous settlement to avoid a wrongful termination lawsuit. They knew I had grounds, given how Victoria had orchestrated everything I took the money, signed the non-disclosure agreement that specifically excluded the criminal proceedings, and walked away from corporate life with enough capital to start over on my own terms. The office space I found in Bridgeport was nothing like Apex's glass towers. It was a converted corner unit in a building that housed a bakery, a tax preparation service, and a family law practice. The morning light streamed through windows that actually opened, and the superintendent, Mr. Rodriguez, brought me homemade empanadas on my first day. The rent was reasonable, the neighborhood felt real, and nobody knew about the Vance scandal or cared about my former life in Chicago's financial district. Clarity Compliance Consulting officially opened on a Tuesday in September. Evelyn, the forensic accountant who had helped me uncover everything, sent me my first client, a small import business whose owner was worried about internal fraud. Within a week, I had identified 3 areas of vulnerability and helped them implement controls that would protect them from the kind of exploitation the Vances had perpetrated. That client referred me to her sister, who ran a medical practice. The sister referred me to a colleague with a growing tech startup. By the end of the month, I had 6 clients who valued my expertise, not because of my corporate pedigree, but because I helped them protect their businesses from predators who viewed small companies as easy targets. My work had purpose now in a way it never had at Apex. These weren't billionaires shuffling assets to avoid taxes. These were people who had built something real with their own hands and needed someone to help them protect it. A florist who'd been overcharged by her payment processor for years. A restaurant owner whose manager was skimming from the till. A nonprofit director who discovered her board treasurer had been steering contracts to his wife's company. Each case reminded me that financial crimes weren't just about numbers. They were about trust betrayed, about people who thought relationships meant more than money, discovering just how wrong they were. October brought news through the legal grapevine that the Vance estate was for sale. I drove out to Lake Forest on a Sunday, parking across from the Colonial that had hosted so many family dinners where my destruction was planned between courses. The realtor's sign swayed in the autumn wind, and through the windows, I could see the rooms were already empty. Margaret's prized chandelier was gone. Richard's library, where they had collected first editions they never read, stood bare. A neighbor walking her dog recognized me and stopped to chat. "Such a shame about the Vances," she said, though her tone suggested she was enjoying the gossip. "I heard they had to sell everything, the house, the cars, even Margaret's jewelry collection. The legal fees, and Richard's health hasn't been good since the stress of it all." I made appropriate, sympathetic noises, but felt nothing. They had chosen this path every time they facilitated a secret meeting, every time they discussed my schedule to create opportunities for betrayal, every time they looked me in the eye while knowing what they were stealing from me. The criminal trials began in January. Victoria plea bargained down to 2 years in a minimum security facility and 5 years of probation in exchange for testifying about the broader corruption at Apex. The Vance family business dissolved entirely, its assets liquidated to pay fines and settlements. Leo avoided prison, but just barely. He received 3 years of probation and was permanently barred from working in the financial services industry. His mugshot appeared in the business section of the Chicago Tribune, his face gaunt and hollow, nothing like the confident man who had once stood beside me at our wedding. Richard suffered a mild heart attack during the proceedings, and now required constant care that depleted whatever savings they had managed to hide from investigators. Margaret, who had spent decades cultivating her position in society, found herself uninvited from charity boards and social clubs. Chloe moved to Seattle, changed her last name, and started over where nobody knew about the scandal. My 40th birthday arrived in March, exactly 1 year after the party that had destroyed the Vance dynasty. Kara insisted on hosting a dinner at her apartment. Nothing fancy, just friends who had known me before I became Mrs. Vance, before Apex, before any of it mattered. We sat around her kitchen table, eating Chinese takeout from containers, drinking wine that cost $12 a bottle, and playing cards until midnight. No one mentioned Leo or the scandal. We talked about normal things, Kara's promotion at the hospital, our friend Beth's new baby, the book club selection that nobody had actually finished reading. "You seem good," Kara said as she walked me to the door at the end of the evening. Really good, not just surviving, but actually good. She was right. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I felt completely aligned with my own life. No performance, no managing appearances, no strategic relationships that required constant maintenance and calculation. A week later, I stood on my brownstone steps, coffee in hand, watching my neighborhood wake up to a perfect spring morning. The cherry trees were blooming along the street and families were beginning their Sunday routines. A young couple walked past with their baby in a stroller, and I thought about the children Leo and I had never had. A blessing now, though it hadn't felt that way at the time. My phone buzzed with a text from a new client, a small investment firm that wanted help establishing compliance protocols to protect them from both internal fraud and predatory partners. It was exactly the kind of work that mattered, helping businesses protect themselves from people like Victoria and the Vances. The truth I'd learned wasn't about revenge or justice or even survival. It was simpler than that. When someone shows you through their actions that your dignity is an acceptable casualty for their gain, believe them, document everything. Report it to the proper authorities, and then build something better from whatever remains. The Vances thought they were conducting a sophisticated financial operation, that their conspiracy was about money and connections and strategic advantages. They never understood that what they were really doing was teaching me my own worth, not in dollars or social standing, but in the simple ability to recognize deception, document truth, and refuse to be complicit in my own destruction. Standing there in the spring morning, I realized I'd won something more valuable than any settlement or verdict. I had won the right to live without pretense, to work without compromise, and to trust without fear. The Vances had lost everything, trying to take what wasn't theirs. I had gained everything by simply refusing to let them. If this story of calculated revenge kept you riveted until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Isla handed Leo that envelope at her own birthday party, watching his world crumble as he realized she'd documented everything. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. End of story.